The fade means it is time to talk signing day 2014. We're actually just in the middle of it, but so much has happened. There's no time for music. There's no time for fancy introductions. You just need to know this. That is Bud Elliott, SB Nation recruiting editor. He's a machine. Look at him. My name is Dan Rubenstein. This is my home. Bud is up from Florida, where he knows everything. And that's me echoing, but that's okay. That's my fault. But it's been a morning chock full of announcements. Really not a morning filled with surprises.
No, the news today, I think, is that we've had very few surprises. I mean, almost everybody out there went to someone, or to a team, rather, that I think we could really see them going to.
Right.
The biggest surprise of the day probably was Rashaan Evans at Alabama, where Auburn had posted a profile of him on their site, which I'm sure we'll get into in a second here. I think LSU may have just done the same thing with Adoree Jackson. So that could be our theme for the day. Yes, they've since taken it down, but there's some screenshots going around of that.
There's some gun jumping early this morning.
Rashaan Evans, five-star linebacker, dad played for Auburn, mom graduated from Auburn, lives in
what city?
Auburn, Alabama, goes to Auburn High School, commits to Alabama.
Yeah.
So that's kind of your big surprise of the day. I think the other one, maybe Malik McDowell, the 6'7", 290-pound 17-year-old, which is key here.
Yes, because he needs a parent signature.
Correct, and he went to Michigan State over the objection of his parents. And as of yet, about 1 o'clock here, Michigan State has not received his actual letter of intent, which must be approved by your parents. So we'll see how that's going to work out.
New tradition on signing day, by the way. Last year we saw Alex Collins with Arkansas. And
2 years ago we had the A&M cornerback whose mom forged. Yes.
That'll happen. So 17-year-olds, take note. Have a good relationship with your parents and figure out a school that everybody wants to go to. So let's get started with the day's commitments. Early on we had Solomon Young go to Stanford.
Thomas.
Excuse me, Solomon Thomas, excuse me. Yeah, a lot of names to keep track of. So Solomon Thomas going to Stanford, not a huge surprise, although you thought Arkansas was going to be a major player late.
I tell you, the people that I know at Arkansas thought they were really going to get him. Obviously, he valued education a lot. Stanford had always sort of been in there. It was surprising at the end that he had also had UCLA in his final top three. I know he had a good visit out there, but in the end, Stanford, with the education, he pulls out the tree from under the desk, and that was kind of a cool thing. It's not quite the Georgia Bulldog puppy, but it's not bad.
Botany. It's actually been a nice day for the Pac-12, and it's far from over just because the West Coast things happen later on in the day, but Mitrell McGraw goes to Oregon. You have Kenny Young, a guy you really like from New Orleans, going to UCLA. UCLA putting together a terrific defensive class. We're going to talk about that later on. So in terms of surprises, really the Rashaan Evans thing was the big one. Anybody else? You have Braden Smith going to Auburn.
Yeah, that was a really kind of a toss-up between TCU, where his sister goes, and Auburn. I know he had a great visit to Auburn, the four-star offensive guard out of Kansas. Actually kind of looks like Dolph Lundgren. You can go on YouTube.
That's what you want.
Yeah,
in an offensive
lineman. That is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You can go on YouTube. He benches like 515, or I think it was 515 3 times.
What he was doing,
and just throws it up and reps it.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really nice get for them. But it's, I guess the news of the day is that it's really been sort of uneventful. People went where we thought they were going to go.
And also on the West Coast, Budda Baker, his letter of intent, his national letter of intent officially in at Washington, and he's a product of that state.
Committed last night. Former Oregon commit. Chris Peterson did a great job to close the state of Washington in these final 6 weeks. Yes,
and we're going to talk about the Pac-12 in depth a little bit later. And then across the South, things are expected, but now classes are coming together. We'll talk Florida State, obviously, in a little while, but Erman Lane adds to what's already a tremendous, they miss out on Malachi Dupree, but he adds to a tremendous Florida State class at receiver.
Yes, Florida State lose Kelvin Benjamin to the draft. They lose Kenny Shaw to the NFL draft, and they had to get some guys to get in there and catch football. They already had Travis Rudolph, who we saw commit at the Under Armour game. Then you had Erman Lane, five-star out of Homestead, former Florida commit. And then they also flip Javon Harrison, a four-star receiver, committed to Virginia, or who was previously committed to Virginia Tech up until today. They do miss out on Malachi Dupree, but you're going to be hard-pressed, really, to find a better group of receivers, maybe in Texas A&M, than what Florida State just signed today.
Absolutely. And so you look at LSU. LSU is, rich getting richer. You talk about Florida State in the receiver position. LSU going after a lot of speed in this class. Leonard Fournette officially a Bayou Bengal, and then Malachi Dupree, who I think you consider to be the best receiver in the country. Travante Valentine, another name that was expected, you thought expected. He ends up sending in his facts to LSU. And is there anybody else for LSU expected? This is clearly a top 5 class. What is your immediate reaction to what LSU has done today?
I think LSU has done a really nice job filling their needs. Obviously, some LSU fans are going to think this is a bit of a disappointment because you saw they lost Gerald Willis to Florida. They lost Cam Robinson to Alabama. They lost Speedy Noel to Texas A&M. But overall, I think LSU did a really nice job of filling their needs and filling their needs with talented guys. it's disappointing to LSU fans because they had a real shot at the #1 class.
Right.
But it's really a top 5 class that really fills your needs, and you're not just filling up on stars, but you're actually filling those stars into where you need them.
Right.
Is a really big success in my mind.
When you have 2 defensive tackle spots immediately up for grabs in Baton Rouge, so it's Trevante Valentine, a lesser known guy, Trey. It starts with an L.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to attempt it. I'm going to get it wrong. So another talented guy who was down between. He was originally committed to Texas. I believe he's from South Texas.
Yeah.
And was originally committed to the Longhorns. Looked at Oregon. Looked at LSU. Eventually ended up at LSU. I think his sister is down in the area. So addressing needs is sort of the name of the day.
And that's a big get. With LSU, I know we'll talk to our LSU blogger here in a minute, or I'll just talk to him about it now, actually, excuse me. They filled their needs. They're still looking at Adoree Jackson, obviously a 5-star athlete, receiver/corner out of Southern California.
Who's announcing here in about an hour.
I think a lot of the feeling with LSU fans is we did a nice job. We filled our needs. We got a lot of 4 and 5 stars. But Alabama just signed far and away the #1 class in the country, and they're in our own division, and they took a lot of good players out of our state, and they took a player like Tony Brown, out of Beaumont, Texas, Ozen, whose sister runs track at LSU, a player that LSU really thought they were going to get, and Nick Saban ends up coming to get him. So it's a great class, and if you put that class in any other division, their fans are just jumping for joy. But when you're in the West, that's tough.
Yeah, and Texas, another team we'll talk about later, not closing particularly strong. The early impact guys not ending up there. I think Poona Ford, who is a nice sort of jewel and a silver lining for this class in transition because of the coaching change. So Poona Ford he was expected to go with Charlie Strong, originally committed to Louisville, and now he ends up in Austin. Anything that you see in him, he should end up competing at least early on?
Yeah, I think Poona Ford, because of the intensity he plays with, he's a guy with a great motor, undersized defensive tackle in terms of height. I mean, you're looking at a guy who's probably 6 foot on a good day, close to 300 pounds, maybe 290, great leverage. If you're going to be short, you got to play low. And he really does play low, does a nice job getting in under the blockers of opposing offensive linemen. And I like the kid a lot. Now, I don't think he's going to be a starter, but he may come in for some quality reps. And I think with Charlie Strong, and I know we'll speak with Westcott later, but it's going to take a little bit of time for him to establish that. But I really think he will get Texas up and running. If he can recruit that well at Louisville, he's going to do that well at Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was about 700 pounds of Damian that committed to schools today. That's a lot of Damian, by the way. Damian Prince commits to Maryland, a local product. Every single team in the country wanted Damian Prince, and then Damian Mama. I think Prince slotted to be a tackle, Mama more probably on the inside. He commits to USC. Your immediate reaction, I know Mama has long been sort of destined for USC. Are these guys good enough to compete right away? Do you think they can manage their weight? Is that the big issue moving forward?
Yeah, I think Prince is the kid going to Maryland. Prince, our 5-star tackle, has already done a better job of showing he can manage his weight. He's lost considerable bad weight for his junior year, added quickness. It really showed his reflexes and his athleticism. And I think that's a good choice for him to stay home where he has his family structure there, a coaching staff he trusts at Maryland. And I think he will be a starting tackle for Maryland from day one.
Sure.
Mama is a kid who some people think he can play tackle. If he gets his weight under control, maybe he can play right tackle. I do think, though, that he has really Pro Bowl potential at guard. He's a guy with just tremendous power, a great punch, can actually bend pretty well for a guy who's that large. I mean, we're talking about a 300.
I'm sure he bends better than I do at 6 foot 170.
Right, and
much
so
better.
He's you plus 200 pounds essentially.
Right.
So
terrific.
Yeah,
that's a terrible, terrible visual for everybody watching this right now. All right, let's do a deeper dive in Alabama in a second. But first, to you, who won the morning in terms of closing, in terms of getting what they should have, or surprising people? Which coach has the crown of the morning?
In terms of people who added, or teams that added the most good players this morning, Florida State did well. LSU obviously added a couple nice pieces. Maryland really needed Prince. But adding Rashaan Evans to what Alabama has is just nuts. I mean, there weren't many surprises because almost all these
he's on the inside or the outside.
He's going to be an outside.
He'll be an outside backer.
Yeah, and a player with great versatility who we know can stay on the field for all 3 downs. And Nick Saban loves to run all these substitution packages, but when you're facing a team like Auburn that runs that hurry-up, no-huddle spread stuff, you have to have some guys that can stay on the field and maybe not substitute out. And Evans has great versatility like that, ability to rush the passer, ability to really play against the pass and in pass coverage. That was a big get, and that to me pushes Alabama's class from it's just going to get into legendary status. If these guys pan out, Bama's going to win another couple championships.
All right, let's do a deeper dive into Alabama's class. We've got the top 5 guys that should be competing for spots right away. I mean, you're in love with Cam Robinson, and so is every single other person. You mentioned Tony Brown from Beaumont, Texas. Deshaun Hand, somebody that came in from the Virginia area where they've recruited pretty well of note. Marlon Humphrey and Rashawn Evans, who we've been talking about. And then, as you mentioned, this list should be about 12 or 14 guys long with the sheer amount of talent they've brought in.
Yeah, Alabama's class is just sick. I mean, we list 5 here. Before we went on the air, I asked Dan if we could list like 15 because it really, it's nuts to leave some of these kids off. You have Cameron Robinson, who just a tackle that I thought was a very, very good college player when I first saw him from behind at the opening.
Yeah.
And then I realized he wasn't. He was actually a high schooler. I had never seen him in person prior to that. Great length, 6'6", 325. I think he would start for a lot of good BCS teams if he had skipped his senior year of high school. I really mean that. Guy's just, he's advanced. He has good technique. He has great balance. Very light feet. A guy who's 325 pounds should not be able to move like that. And they just signed good player after good player, and just guys with every single big offer in the country, really.
Is there a comparison that you can make for Cam Robinson of recent high-level 5-stars at Chantrell Henderson, Cyrus Kwanjo? Is he more college-ready than both of those guys who have been up there?
Yeah, I think he's definitely in that Kwanjo mold.
He's in the Kwanjo mold.
Just a guy with great athleticism. He may have a little bit more power than Kwanjo did initially. I thought Kwanjo had a little more room to fill out, and he did eventually at Alabama. Robinson, to me, it's just the balance. He seems to, he's always in a good position to deliver a blow, doesn't get beat back to the inside a whole lot. His feet never real narrow. He's wide in his base when he needs to be, light on the feet, plays in a good football position. It's just, you don't see a whole lot of guys his age and that size have that sort of body control. It's kind of like big men in basketball.
Sure, absolutely. And Marlon Humphrey and Tony Brown, you can make an argument that they're 2 of the absolute best in that group of national cornerbacks. Who do you feel like sees the field? Who's abilities will translate quicker to the college game, especially since Alabama, the corners struggled a little bit last year. We saw at times in the Oklahoma game, obviously early on in the Texas A&M game. Who is more ready to physically play in a more complicated coverage-based defense?
I actually think it's Marlon Humphrey. We know that Alabama needs a lot of help at cornerback. They get Marlon, the son of Bobby Humphrey, obviously an Alabama legend, played at Hoover High School just down the road from Tuscaloosa. He's more advanced technique-wise than Tony Brown is. Tony Brown is a faster player, perhaps greater upside, but Humphrey is the best corner in the country, in my opinion. Maybe with Jabril Peppers accepted, the kid going to Michigan, I know we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
I think Humphrey's going to come in, and if he doesn't start, he's going to play a significant role in that defense from day one. And
another guy you mentioned that's not on that list is DJ Petway, who was at Alabama.
Yes.
Now being readmitted to Alabama after, we'll call it an incident. We'll call it an incident. JUCO guy now officially. You feel like he can jump in right away. They are losing some in their front 7. He's a defensive end, can play big enough to play in that 3-4 on the line. How do you project? Is he a starter right away? Is he lining up next to Ashawn? What is the situation with Petway?
He's a player I know Alabama really liked when they had him, and obviously he had to go away because of the legal stuff, and now he's back. Alabama fans are probably pretty happy to see that.
Sure.
I think he's a guy who has a great blend of quickness and power, and it's another guy who can get after the pass rusher a little bit, but also is going to be very stout against the run. And a player who I do think can play multiple downs for them as well, as opposed to some of these more specialists they've had. I know Alabama, I think after playing Auburn this year and after facing A&M and all that, and the struggles they've had a little bit in those games, is sort of looking to get players with more versatility and perhaps a little bit less specialization.
All right, and we are now joined by, from Roll Bama Roll, obviously, the destination for Alabama football and all things Alabama recruiting, Alabama sports in general. It's CB969. He's a robot. He's not a robot. He's the editor of Roll Bama Roll. CB, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Your reaction immediately to a pretty devastatingly dominant class for Alabama. What's the big takeaway? How well did you think Nick Saban and staff did evaluating talent and addressing sort of value needs?
Well, we here in Tuscaloosa thought we were just going to have a quiet, uneventful day. And then, boom, Sean Evans pulls the Crimson Tide out of his pocket, and that just blew us all away. We were already, beyond happy with the class we got. I thought it was really interesting. If you look at who this class is full of, you could practically put together an entire team with just who they have. They've got 6 offensive linemen, they got a quarterback, a tight end, wide receivers, and then on the other side they have 4 linebackers, 6 defensive linemen, and 4 defensive backs. So it just spreads the whole gamut of what you need, and I think they did a fantastic job.
Who have you been hearing has the talent, who to your eyes has the talent, has the abilities, whether it's physically, whether it's sort of brain capacity to take in and learn a playbook that can be a complicated one, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Who are the early impact guys to you as you see it?
Well, on the offensive side, I really like Cameron Robinson a lot. He's the top lineman in the country.
Yep.
And with Cyrus Kwanja going off to the NFL, there's a good chance he could step in there at left tackle. On the defensive side,
yeah,
it is a tough defense to learn, and Alabama picked up Reuben Foster a year ago, who was one of the top in the nation, and he got a lot of playing time, but he didn't crack the lineup.
Right.
So it is a tough lineup. It's a tough defense to learn, and there are a few questions at cornerback. So I'm thinking with Tony Brown coming in early, it's perhaps he could help out there at corner, and of course Marlon Humphrey is a big pickup as well.
Perfect. Any names that are more long-term names for you? Obviously, Alabama is stacked at a number of positions along the field. Any names that you're curious to see what they are physically, where they are just skill-wise in 2 or 3 years?
Well, yeah, obviously with Jake Coker becoming the quarterback this year, it'll be interesting to see what happens with David Cornwell. People are very excited about him, but now he's going to have a couple years to learn behind a veteran, which is going to be really nice.
Perfect. Well, CB, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the effort. As somebody who does not root for Alabama but appreciates dominant football, a Roll Tide to you, sir. Today was a huge win, especially with the Rashaan Evans pick, and enjoy your signing day.
Yes, thank you very much. Y'all have a good day.
All right, that is CB from Roll Bama Roll. They, of course, do a fantastic job covering all things Tide. Let's stay within the SEC West. You mentioned LSU and how well they did this morning, specifically locking up the guys that they should have locked up. A talent-rich state. I mean, it is sort of every year, but this year in particular,
sure.
It was, early on in the process, you yourself were saying if they can lock up just Louisiana kids, they're putting together a legendary class.
It's a really special year in Louisiana. And, of course, Louisiana always has a lot of underrated talent, but I feel like this year they had a lot of top-line talent. It was guys that everybody knew about, everybody offered early, and LSU did not end up getting all of them, but they still grabbed a really nice class. I know we're looking here at the top LSU commits.
Yep.
Leonard Fournette, far and away the best, one of the best running backs, perhaps the best since Adrian Peterson. I know a lot of folks have made a comparison.
You get that every year, the best since AD, yeah.
Exactly. We talk about Lattimore, but we talk about the kid that went to Georgia and then got kicked out.
Crowell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We talked about those guys previously. A couple of the kids who went to Texas. I don't think Fournette is like Peterson stylistically, but I do think talent-wise he's probably one of the best.
And physically, he's already so prepared for an SEC West type
6'1", 2 1/4. He has every single tool you're looking for, maybe except for great long speed.
Right.
But the thing that really stands out for me, and this reminds me of Willis McGahee a little bit, back when he was at Miami before he tore his knee in the title game, is that great short area quickness, the ability to make people miss in space in between the tackles and then break those big runs out of there. And for a kid that's 225 pounds to be able to re-accelerate after making a cut, that's sick. You don't see that a lot. I think Fournette would start for a lot of college football teams, much like I said with Cam Robinson. If he had skipped his senior year of high school,
he's there and ready.
Yes, exactly.
All right, let's take a deeper dive and look at the rest of the LSU commitments. You have Malachi Dupree announcing this morning, Trevante Valentine, and 2 Treys in this class. That's at least fun. Trey Quinn, a local. They go into Texas, which, as you've mentioned a lot of time, South Texas for a long time. A&M is now doing a much better job, but that's been LSU territory. Any other names that stand out to you as guys immediately competing? We talked about the hole at defensive tackle. LSU's class, where else do you see early impact?
Well, you mentioned Trevante Valentine, a former Miami commitment who ended up flipping to LSU after decommitting a couple weeks ago. That was big. If Valentine comes in and is in shape and has his head on and he's ready to work, he can.
Is that a thing with him, though? Is it that discipline?
He's about 338, and I think they probably want him to come in more like the 320, 315 range. I mean, obviously, that's a lot of body for a high schooler to handle, like we talked about with Damian Mama earlier, the guard of the USC there. I think could play some real good snaps for them. Jamal Adams is a fantastic safety, just great range, also great ability against the run. Trey Quinn is a college-ready receiver, for sure. And Malachi Dupree has a much higher ceiling, but he is fairly raw. Trey Quinn is another really good player that they signed, who's a great route runner, has underrated speed, great quickness, catches the ball really naturally. I think you're going to like him a lot. And he actually may play and make a better impact early on than Malachi, although I do think Dupree obviously has a higher ceiling.
Yeah, can we take a look at, by the way, it's just filthy at Leonard Fournette. Just what type of running back he is. I believe we have video. He's so the fact, the upright running style. If you see here, I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean that is a gentleman. You'll see here, I mean, the speed, it's deceiving because he's so big.
Right.
And that is somebody that physically, you can step right in for Jeremy Hill. He's in the shotgun. You know they like to run different sets at LSU. And just he gets to the second
nice
level
cut on the
so
zone, on
quickly.
the outside zone there. As an Oregon fan, I know you can appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's not trying to be too complicated, not trying to reverse field a ton. It's the one cut and go. Those are the guys that succeed quickest.
He seems to know what he
levels.
is. There's not a lot of Pop Warner, bounce everything,
Right.
pretend everything's a sweep in this game like you see with some backs, and they get away with that
Right.
at the high school level, not in college. He actually plays pretty good competition there in New Orleans. I mean, that's a really good league, and he's destroying this league. I mean, he scored, 40-something touchdowns, I believe, as a junior. He was just
ridiculous.
Was nuts.
Good kid. You've spent time around him?
Yeah, he seems to be pretty cool. He's not full of himself.
I only ask
it's a
because
good vibe.
LSU in recent, they've had a history
Yes.
with gentlemen in their backfield,
Jeremy
whether
Hill,
it's the quarterback, whether it's the running back position. So you like that as a change as well. That
Absolutely.
He seems to have his head on straight. So LSU addressing a number of needs, doing a good job there. I'm encouraged. I'm good for LSU because those LSU Alabama matchups these coming years with how stacked both of these teams are looking, they're going to be ridiculous. People are going to get wounded
Absolutely.
in unfortunate ways. All right, we're going to jump to the ACC because we have Bud Elliott here, and why don't we jump to the crown of the ACC right now? When you look at well, these are early impact commits certainly, and really, it's nice that we have Virginia and Miami and Clemson, but you really could have made this a Florida State list right here, a top 5. But when you look at Florida State, what is the headline of this year's class? They've focused on both lines and the receiver position. Yeah. Is that what jumps out to you?
To me, this class is more about offense.
Okay.
In Jimbo Fisher's early years, he spent a lot of scholarships, and I think to his credit as an offensive coach, he really wanted to beef up that defense and make sure that whoever his defensive coordinator was, whether it was Mark Stoops or Jeremy Pruitt, had the talent they needed to work with there.
Yep.
But in doing so, they kind of...
Which you don't always see with offensive guys, by the way.
Exactly.
There's a certain amount of pride. You want to get the best athletes on offense. Yeah, that's big.
Right. So that's Jimbo's credit. I'm sure part of that comes from going against Nick Saban's defense all the time in practice. This year, he kind of got his. And really came back. They signed, I believe, 7 offensive linemen now, 3 receivers, including 2 5-stars and a 4-star. Really, it's Jimbo with a quarterback. He's put 8 in the league. He's about to put Jameis in the league. I don't really question him on quarterbacks ever anymore. They signed a 5-star running back. It's a loaded class. And I think the key is you have guys who are ready to compete immediately, but you also have some guys who are really talented developmental guys, and they got those in the right spots to where they're not going to have to press these guys into action immediately in positions where they're not ready. They grab 2 tight ends who are kind of raw, but they have 3 scholarship tight ends returning, so they're going to be able to redshirt those kids, put some good weight on them, have them learn the system. It's a really, really good offensive class. I think they met all their needs specific, with numbers and with talent.
Right. Who do you expect of these guys? Because we do have a top 5 list of the early impact guys from Florida State. Again, impossible to narrow it to just 5 with some of these schools. But who do you expect spring ball, fall camp to shoot up depth charts, to really start competing? Perhaps not for a starting role, although we do see openings on the offensive line and receiver and running back. Who do you expect to, or who do you personally look forward to seeing shoot up depth charts?
Sure. For me, it starts with Travis Rudolph, the receiver out of Palm Beach. He's not the guy with the highest ceiling in the country, but kind of like I talked with Trey Quinn earlier, a guy who's really, really ready to play in college. Now, he runs routes like a college receiver. He catches everything. He knows how to get open, good acceleration, decent top-end speed, not great, but a guy that can come in, and even on a team as talented as Florida State, can be your number 2 or number 3 immediately. I really believe that. Armand Lane, a little bit higher ceiling, maybe not quite as polished, but another 5-star receiver they grabbed out of the Homestead area, a former Florida commit there.
Right.
I think he also has a chance to play early. Maybe not quite as much as Rudolph. That's going to be something that's going to be sorted out in fall camp, and then
perhaps a specialty player, running specific kinds of routes and against specific kinds of coverages.
Correct, and playing in the ACC, Florida State blows a lot of these teams out, so they really do get
There's
a good
time.
Yeah, they work a lot of these kids in.
Yeah.
Dalvin Cook, the 5-star running back out of Miami Central, had a great game in the state title when Joseph Yerby, his backfield mate, went down with the leg injury, and I think he has a chance, although they do have Carlos Williams, who may be a little bit difficult to unseat. And then I think an underrated part of this class is the 2 junior college offensive linemen they grabbed.
Okay.
Florida State made it through the year this year really with just paper-thin depth on the offensive line. And nobody got hurt, so and their starters were great. So they won the national title. But if they had gotten some serious injuries there, that would have been a big deal.
There would have been liability.
So they had these two big junior college offensive linemen in Chad Mavity out of New York and in Kareem Ayer, 330, 325-pound dudes. And that allows you to take some of these other offensive linemen you signed and redshirt them.
Develop them, correct.
Exactly.
All right, fair enough. And Dalvin Cook, and you mentioned Carlos Rogers, but you also mentioned that there is time. There are reps to be had if Florida State is playing Boston College and NC State and Maryland and blowing them out. What type of back is Dalvin Cook? Do you expect him to be the guy in the second half, sort of just learning the speed of the college game? Is he a breakaway guy, sort of like Dalvin Cook and like all-purposey, or excuse me, like Devonta Freeman, or is he more of a complete back?
You know, actually, when he was committed to Clemson as a junior, a lot of people made the comparison to C.J. Spiller, and here we're watching these Dalvin Cook highlights.
Right.
And you really see that. It's a guy, when he gets a crease, he can break it. He reminds me of some of those Oregon backs. He's bigger. He's not the most natural inside runner. He does tend to bounce things a little bit. I'd like to see him use a little bit more patience inside. But
right.
Very few players in the country are going to catch Cook when he gets outside.
You're seeing
here
the
he breaks
bounce,
it
but then,
on a ridiculous angle and then and then makes that guy look silly. And that's the state title game against Armwood in a really, really high classification in Florida. These are not some scrub teams he's playing against. So I think a guy that needs to learn the position a little bit more, probably work on his blocking. Hasn't had to block a whole lot. I do like how he catches the football, and there's a really nice move there to get open. And when he's in the open field, he has the jets. I think if he can become a little more patient and instinctive inside, you're looking at a really, really good back.
And you know who likes throwing screens to fast receivers or fast running backs?
Yeah, Jimbo.
Jimbo Fisher. So that's definitely a role, as you see, just his ability to accelerate quickly, that you could see him filling in the very near future. Who's enrolling early off the top of your head for Florida State?
Sure, they have Dalvin Cook, the 5-star running back. They have Kane Dobb, the 4-star linebacker. Trey Marshall, 4-star safety out of Lake City, Columbia. Tim Jernigan's old high school.
Yep.
And then they have Stephen Gabbard, the long snapper, and then Curry Mayer, the
Got to get those
offensive
long
lineman.
snappers in early.
Hey, and also an FSU legacy.
Yes.
Well, that's the key, because you only have a certain number of spots in a class, and so you can tell the kid, hey, if you want to be in this thing, you need to get in early so that we can count our numbers correctly.
Yeah, you can have the same sort of fun you would have at prom at Florida State.
Exactly.
I've heard.
And he's from Tallahassee, so you could probably still go to prom.
You can probably still go to prom. That's a thing that happens as well. Okay, so Florida State in fantastic shape. You mentioned Clemson as where Dalvin Cook was previously committed. They address a number of their needs in this class. Dabo Swinney really has done a very good job at Clemson.
Yes.
You know, he gets the crap from Steve Spurrier, which, by the way, hilarious. But you look at the list in front of you of the speed that they're bringing in. Artavis Scott, I know you're huge on, and then Deshaun Watson, one of, if not the best dual threat quarterback in this class. So how do you evaluate the job that the Tigers have done?
I think Clemson did a really good job at meeting its needs here. It needed a couple of defensive linemen, but it mostly needed receivers and the next quarterback, because they lose Taj Boyd to the draft. You lose Sammy Watkins to the draft. You lose Martavis Bryant.
They replace a Martavis with an Artavis, which
That's
I
pretty
think
cool.
is really nice.
Yeah, and I think Artavis could be an upgrade against Martavis, because Artavis may have a little better work ethic.
Yes.
And could perhaps play a little bit earlier. He's a different type of player, obviously. Martavis, big, tall, fast. Artavis, kind of short, compact, fast. You can use him in a lot of different ways.
Right.
Deshaun Watson, one of the best dual threat quarterbacks in the country, probably the best, to be honest. And they got him in early, which is nice. It'll give him a true chance to compete for that job against Chad Kelly and who's their third? Cole Stout, who they've had behind Boyd for a couple of years. Artavis Scott is a guy that you can use in a lot of different ways. You know, he in fact, in high school, some of his highlights show him blocking some kicks and punts because he's so quick and agile off the edge. He's able to really bend the arc and get there quickly. A guy that can make things happen with the ball in his hands, an explosive athlete. Travion Thompson, a little bit bigger, more of a possession guy.
Right.
And then DeMar Kidd is a guy with some nice blend and balance there as well.
And they've recruited the defensive side of the ball, and they return pretty much everything in their front seven anyway. So that obviously was not a focus this season.
Correct.
So is it just the offensive guys that you see? They lose their top corner in Bashan Breeland. They lose their top corner. Is there anything you see, or any names that you see immediately coming in and competing for starting jobs?
You know, I think Clemson is really, really set on defense. I mean, they return, I think, their entire front. I believe they have most of their linebackers or all their linebackers back. They do lose Breeland. But even in the secondary, they lose Breeland, but not much else. And they've got some guys that have played a lot of snaps there. Their best defender they're bringing in is a kid named Corey Rogers out of Atlanta. Well, Buford, technically.
Right.
But, you know, suburb of Atlanta out there. A real tackling machine. I think if he was 2 or 3 inches taller, you'd probably see him rise up in the rankings quite a bit if he had a little bit more length. But a guy, I think, in college, sometimes length and height is a little bit overrated.
Sure.
In the NFL, you can afford to be a little pickier on that. But in college, I think he's going to make a lot of tackles, just like he did in high school.
All right, and we do have some footage, because what's the point of just talking about fantastic players? We have Artavis Scott. We have just how talented he is. The visual is striking if we have that. But yeah, Clemson, they're not going to struggle, especially with keeping Chad Morris there. They're going to be in a good position to get the ball in playmakers' hands. You see here just the ability to focus, and then after, I mean, it's a 10-yard run after the catch. But
exactly.
I like the posing. I like that. That's going to make for entertaining times in Death Valley.
Eastlake will pose on you.
Yeah, and he's playing. He's
handing
from
the ball there, exactly. You can get Tay the ball in a lot of different creative ways. And I know Chad Morris is somebody who's very much known for that.
Yep.
We saw him hand the football to Sammy Watkins
early
a lot
on,
this year. Tay does not have Sammy Watkins' breakaway ability, but he does have similar short area quickness, and he's very strong. He's kind of difficult to bring down, actually. A kid who I think, for his size, does have really good strength and some great football instincts. A tough competitor. I know he goes hard on every rep. Really like Tay Scott.
Where is he from?
He's out of Eastlake, which is kind of northeast Tampa area.
Okay, so good competition playing. So we feel good about our Tavis Scott. Clemson is basically in a position now where they're recruiting. They're recruiting to be the best possible team, but they have South Carolina and they have Florida State.
Exactly, and Louisville joins that division.
And Louisville joins that division. So they're positioning themselves, considering what South Carolina, what Florida State has been doing. They're in a good position to compete, perhaps more so than they were this year.
Yeah, I think so. Was Florida State really, 5 or 6 touchdowns better than Clemson? Maybe not.
Right.
That thing kind of snowballed on Clemson. I think Florida State was clearly better, but they weren't, 5, 6 touchdowns better probably over the course of the whole season. But yeah, I do think Clemson is setting themselves up with the talent in order to compete long term. And
Deshaun Watson, what type of polish have you seen from him as a quarterback? There will be a quarterback competition. They bring in Chad Kelly a couple of years ago, the quarterback position. What do you see in terms of competition and what Deshaun Watson is capable of immediately?
A big, strong kid with a big arm. I think he could polish up his mechanics a little bit, but that's the key. If you get in early, you get to go through spring. You get to go through. You're acclimated to college, and for a quarterback, that's really big because there's a lot of different responsibilities you have as a quarterback that other players don't have. And so when you mix that with trying to figure out where your classes are as a freshman and find out where to eat and all that kind of different stuff, that's tough. That's just kind of normal life stuff that people, I think, overlook sometimes with quarterbacks. So if you get in early like Watson did, that's a big help. And I think he will actually be in that quarterback battle.
We have a few minutes before we're going to talk Big Ten. In the ACC, obviously, it's very heavy at the top with Florida State and Clemson. Other prospects, other teams putting together interesting class, perhaps not elite classes. You have your 4- and 5-star rule, having more of them than 2- and 3-stars if you want to compete for a national championship or at least be on the national level. Any classes that you're intrigued by, prospects you're intrigued by? We talked about Maryland, but Maryland going over to the Big Ten. What else intrigues you about the Atlantic Coast Conference?
I really like Miami's class. They missed on Valentine, which was a big need, but other than that, they did a really nice job of bringing in some impact players at important positions. Who's Miami's best defensive end right now? Exactly. So they bring in 5-star Chad Thomas.
That was silence, by the way. Yeah.
They bring in 5-star Chad Thomas out of Booker T, a kid who I really, really like, wants to be a rap producer as well, and is
who doesn't, bud?
Really bright kid. Yeah, exactly. So being in Miami is a good spot for that. You make a lot of connections. I think he can play early and immediately. They lose Malcolm Bunch to a transfer to UCLA, actually. So Casey McDermott, one of the best offensive tackles, comes in, and he's actually in early. Like we just got done talking about how big of an advantage that really is. And I think the key for Al Golden in this class is that the cloud of the sanctions has been lifted. And for sure, they were negatively recruited by other staffs with that. I don't think there's any denying that. There are far fewer kids in this class that make me think, what the heck is Miami doing? I think every single kid that they took, almost to a man, can play. And I really didn't believe that in previous years. I think in some years, because they were worried about some sanctions, I think they took some kids just to make sure that they had a full roster in case sanctions did come. And I think if you had told Al Golden, hey, you're not going to have these bad sanctions, I wonder if he would have done some of the previous recruiting stuff differently. Although I think what he did was appropriate given the circumstance they had. Yeah,
and the continuity. It's huge to have Al Golden, who did flirt with the Penn State job.
Right.
You have the coaching staff stay intact. That's going to be huge moving forward. And yes, the cloud of the sanctions not hovering over Miami is going to be enormous. They bring in a quarterback actually from Southern California, Miami.
Yes.
Who ignored essentially USC, UCLA, all sorts of big West Coast schools. Yeah. Chaminade's Brad Kaya. Is he somebody that can come in right away? Stephen Morris moving on to the NFL. What do you anticipate Al Golden being the type of coach that would give a true freshman a shot?
I think it depends on what they have. They did recruit Kevin Olson, who's going to be in his second year there, a blue chip kid out of New Jersey.
Greg Olson's little brother. Yeah.
Exactly. If he has his head on straight, and of course he was suspended and they didn't bring him to the bowl game, but if he has his head on straight, he has a lot of talent, and I would expect him to be able to really compete for that job. They also have Ryan Williams, who's like a fifth-year senior.
Yep.
Smaller arm, accurate, experience, that type of thing. But if both those guys falter, I don't know who else you turn to. I think Kai would really have a shot at that job. The only limiting factor there is that he's not coming in early. And it's really tough to start. The ACC is not the best conference, but it's not, the MAC or something. It's hard to start a player like that as a true freshman unless you're really just willing to go through the growing pains on the season. So hopefully Kyle won't start for Miami, because I think if he does, that's probably problematic.
He needs some time. And you mentioned Louisville. We talked about, before the show, NC State, a number of intriguing prospects, perhaps not immediate all-ACC players, but you like what they've done with their class. Anybody else standing out? Are there dudes at BC?
Yeah.
Be a dude. Are you happy with them? Where are you standing?
I think BC's doing a really nice job of scouting folks.
Okay.
And they have 2 quarterbacks. They're going to more of a power spread type scheme,
sure,
as opposed to the I formation lining up thing they were doing this year.
Right.
Adazio did a great job of playing with what they had this year.
Yeah,
but
they competed with a number of better teams.
Yeah, playing with what you have, recruit to what you want to be.
Right.
And so that's what he's doing right there. I think they're doing a nice job with some offensive linemen. I would like to see them get some bigger impact guys on the defensive line. But overall, that's a really nice class for Adazio BC.
And that's a school that can point to perhaps having the best defensive player in the NFL. Played there very recently. You can be the next Luke Kuechly.
Exactly.
Whatever. It's a
out
program.
of Cincinnati as a safety.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
North Carolina is a school that recruited really well under Butch Davis. Larry Fedora has done some interesting things. North Carolina, NC State, Duke has attracted a higher level of talent. Anything else standing out to you sort of in that triangle area?
I think they're all doing a pretty good job, and North Carolina is not recruiting maybe quite as well as they were under Butch Davis, but they're probably coached a lot better now, so I think UNC fans will take that and less scandally.
That's totally
as well.
okay.
Yeah, the Wolfpack, I think they've done a really nice job with this class. They filled a lot of needs, a lot of athleticism on defense. They added Kentavious Street, a 4-star defensive man who wanted to kind of stay home and do that kind of deal. And then Duke, I think, playing the ACC title game and playing in the Chick-fil-A Bowl, that really shows recruits that what Duke is pitching can come true in some ways.
They've invested in that program. Absolutely.
You can only sell kind of this vision you have for a program for so many years. Eventually you have to win something. And Duke cashed it in 2013. They won some stuff, and I think recruits took notice. They added Trevon Lee on Monday night.
Duke is in a fantastic position to keep things up. They've invested in the program. You're seeing them more and more. And they're a program people are sort of excited about because they've been this perennial underdog for so long. So they can play that. You can build something. You can be the next whoever, because they are now building up names there.
And they're investing in football as well. Putting money in that stadium, putting money in the locker rooms. Yeah, exactly. It's becoming more ACC quality as opposed to something else.
Which is important because you're competing against schools that are putting a ton of money. Even Florida State needs
to be redoing their locker rooms. Yeah,
they're redoing. Finally, this is a team that has won multiple national championships in the BCS era, and they're finally just gathering, fundraising.
Exactly. They just got their indoor.
Yep. Yeah. So it's an ongoing process within the ACC. Louisville, anything jumping out to you? They, of course, recruit very well, as you mentioned, with Charlie Strong, Clint Hurt when he was there. What are they doing as they are transitioning to the ACC?
Their class, I think, is probably a disappointment overall.
Okay.
But the real win for Louisville came because of what Charlie Strong did for them, and that's getting them to the ACC. If you were stuck in, we're not talking about UCF today.
Correct.
We're not talking about Temple or any of those teams that got left in there.
Wait, I have 7 pages of Temple notes. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
So is their class disappointing? Yeah, but overall on the year, I think it's been pretty good for Louisville because they do get that extra money that comes from going to the ACC. They're in a legitimate conference now that is going to have an automatic berth, or but it's one of the power
they're going to be on
conferences.
the stage. Yes.
They're doing a nice job. They need some more playmakers at receiver, obviously, to run Petrino's offense, and it's tough for Petrino, a guy who's going to be negatively recruited a lot because of what happened in Atlanta, what happened in Arkansas, and all that kind of stuff. How does he go into a living room and be sincere with the kid? Does he just acknowledge his mistakes and maybe kids enjoy that realism? Or do other coaches say, you can't trust this guy?
Right.
I think you've probably seen the impacts of some negative recruiting early on for Petrino here. But I think he'll eventually get it together. And I would expect Louisville to hit the junior college circuit very hard next year.
And that's where there is a ton of skill position talent where if Bobby Petrino can recruit and develop anything, it is that. It is the receiver position. You saw what he did later on with Joe Adams and guys at Arkansas and Ryan Mallett. So he can point to a track record. He can say, you know what, I made mistakes, but I'm a football coach.
Exactly.
And, find me a football coach. Exactly. I'm not going to go any further into it. But, all right, so the ACC, an interesting place. Let's go to the Big Ten. Ohio State, Urban Meyer having the experience in the SEC recruiting-wise, and it's very clear when you look at his classes thus far at Ohio State. We're going to talk to Luke Zimmerman in a moment, but who stands out to you with this Ohio State class? Where did they do a very good job? Where did they do an excellent job in attracting talent and addressing needs?
I think it starts with linebacker. They grab Raekwon McMillan, one of the best linebackers in the entire country.
Raekwon!
Awesome name.
Raekwon!
Yeah, if you match up the timeline of Enter the Wu-Tang and when Raekwon was born.
Not an accident.
Not exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Big fan of Raekwon. I think he can get on the field early. He's also an early enrollee for them, and so I would expect him to perhaps start for them next year. Damon Webb is a kid I like a lot. The defensive back talent in the Midwest is not that great. And I was at the Columbus Nike Combine, and you had some kids competing at corner.
It's fine.
Right, and there were a lot of them that weren't great, but Webb was really, really good. And what impressed me about Damon was that he took every single rep, and he would jump in to take more reps and more reps. And even though he was dog tired, he was getting beat on some of them. This is a kid with just great determination and tenacity. And I really like that. That's what you need in your corner. A guy who can forget the previous rep, get out there and battle every single play. That was really big. They keep Jamarco Jones, who took that late visit to Michigan State.
Yeah.
I know that there was a lot of strife about that in Columbus. And then Dante Booker is a really, really active. If Raekwon's your big thumper of a linebacker, Dante is more of your small pass, or not small, but smaller pass coverage type backer. It's a really nice class and clearly the best in the Big Ten.
All right, and when you look at the depth of this Ohio State class, are there any other names that further on down the line stand out to you, perhaps as project types, or is it really the headliners with Jamarco and Raekwon and Damon?
Yeah, I think adding Paris Campbell is a big deal for them, a really electric playmaker. We've seen Urban Meyer when he was at Florida get the ball to those young speedsters in that spread offense. Last year, didn't do it quite as much. They used Dontre Wilson some. If Paris Campbell can get on the field, I think he can really make some things happen for them. And the offensive tackle they took from Virginia Tech at the last minute, whose name I forget. Anyway, I like him a lot. He's a 3-star, but I think he's a really high upside.
Okay, and Ohio State, of course, addresses receiver, offensive line, and linebacker. Offensive line, they lose a lot up front. So you're not saying that true freshmen are going to come in and play right away, but maybe rotation guys, maybe compete, and are there for depth. So obviously Urban Meyer recruiting better than anybody in the Big Ten, which I don't think is a surprise to anybody. We should take a look at Raekwon McMillan.
Oh, we should.
His name is Raekwon, and he destroys humans. So we do have clips of Raekwon, if we can roll that, but I'm very excited to see what he can do, especially as this defense evolves. You're about to see people just get blown up and balls get jarred.
And I like the black and gold, too, on the uniform.
You like the black and gold?
Oh, yeah.
And physically, he's ready. Yeah.
Some of these high school kids, are you really signing up for this? Are you sure you're not taking a sick day when you're playing Raekwon McMillan in high school?
I can't see it being a good thing.
And they throw him the ball, too.
Right.
Try to tackle that.
Because why not? And he's just going to fill gaps.
Takes on a block there really well and then reaches around it. Might be a little bit of a face mask, but does a nice job here in lateral pursuit. Not a very good block attempt, but look at that. He shows the ability. That's what you look for in that middle linebacker. Is he big enough to play the run, but can he? Oh, he just crashes there on a great penetration play.
Right.
But can he get outside? Can he be on the field for 3 downs? And I think that was a bit of a question with him, but he showed well his senior year. I think in the Big Ten especially, he has a chance to be a true 3-down middle linebacker, and that's what really separates the great middle linebackers from the ones that are simply good. Can I count on you to play pass coverage as well?
Yeah, and you see how active he is sideline to sideline. Has a very now experienced defensive line in front of him. High-level guys, Adolphus Washington, Noah Spence.
And when he comes
Joey
for
Bosa.
you, your legs stop.
Right.
You don't run this guy over. Your momentum is done when he touches you.
He's a wall that moves at you.
Yeah, I mean, he's about 240 in high school for a backer, which is just huge.
Right. So, okay, so that's a good thing for Ohio State.
It is.
That's a fantastic thing. And here to talk about more good things, we have the editor of Land Grant Holy Land, Luke Zimmerman, also of SB Nation. He's down in D.C. Luke Zimmerman, as big an Ohio State fan as I know. So, Luke Zimmerman, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
And are you excited today? Because you have a Raekwon in your midst.
Yeah, it was a pretty nice, morning, afternoon, whatever you want to call it. I guess Ohio State was actually done by about 10, although there's actually been some sort of drama evolving sort of as I'm talking to you guys. There's a report from some guy tangentially involved with Max Preps and CBS College Sports that Ohio State may have flipped Darius Slade, who originally flipped from Nebraska to Michigan State, then didn't sign. So that's something we're keeping an eye on. I'm still trying to verify the validity of that. The school hasn't acknowledged it yet, so it's not official. But it's crazy. Ohio State got all the guys that they thought they'd be getting by about 10 a.m. So I guess in terms of up until this moment in time, it's been pretty uneventful overall.
All right, fair enough. And we talked about Raekwon McMillan. Jamarco Jones obviously takes the late visit to Michigan State. Who do you expect to immediately come in and compete for spots, compete for depth? Who has that polish? Who has that physical size? We know Urban Meyer has the experience to recruit, not just in the Midwest, but during his time at Florida, did a very good job. Raekwon McMillan, of course, coming up from Georgia. Who do you expect name-wise to be near the top of the depth chart spring and fall camp?
Bud and I have talked about this extensively. Ohio State has the 24/7 composite's third best class in the country, and by all regards, just have guys that are capable of stepping right in and playing immediately. But Urban Meyer, at least this past season, with an even better class, was extremely conservative with the guys that could go ahead and either burn the red shirt on or play in meaningful situations. I'd say a decent number of guys from the 2013 class did play, but whether or not they're actually getting snaps of consequences is something else. And McMillan's a guy you mentioned. He's got not only the skills and the attributes to step in right away. I think earlier today on local sports talk radio, Meyer singled him out as already looking the part of a college junior. But beyond that, we're going to see, and I told this to Bud and he laughed. The other guy that's most likely to make an immediate impact would be Buckner, Kentucky prospect Sean Nurnberger, who's the kicker. His dad actually played against the Dream Team on the German national basketball team way back in '92. But
Okay.
Sean's got a boot. Ohio State needs a kicker. Unless he gets beat out by a walk-on or a specialist tries to kick Anton or something like that, Nurnberger will probably be the guy. So I think those two are the ones that stands out. In terms of other guys that could get snaps right away, Curtis Samuel is a running back wide receiver from Erasmus Hall, Brooklyn prospect. You don't see too many Brooklyn guys, but Ohio State was recruiting a pair of them and landed Samuel in particular. Electric, Oregon-type talent that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yep.
Kind of in the same make and model as Dontre Wilson, who went from Oregon to Ohio State a year ago. I think he'll have the possibility to get some snaps, maybe at like an H-back type position. And then Johnny Dixon is an early enrollee from Palm Beach Gardens, Dwyer. He's a 4-star. Depending on who you talk to, some people really love his upside. Some people think he's just more of a safe type wide receiver, but Meyer's good about him as well, and I think that he could be a guy that sees action early.
And further on down the line, who do you expect, maybe because they're not physically ready, maybe they're just a little bit raw in terms of football, who are you excited to see maybe 2016, 2017, when they fill out, when they get years in the system? What are some long-term project names, if any, in this Ohio State class to you?
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of guys that have extremely high upside, but in terms of instant impact, there's going to be next to none. Terry McLaurin is an absolute burner from Indianapolis, who's kind of a late bloomer. He got his 4-star, that old adage about guys getting higher evaluations after committing to the big boys. He has just a huge breakout cycle at the whole, Nike football training. I don't know what you want to call that, recruiting industrial complex that leads to the opening. He was a star at that. Kind of really stood out at the Spark Combine. I think he's a guy that could be a huge impact deep breath for Ohio State here in a couple of seasons. Matt Hooker is a guy that Western Pennsylvania recruiting experts really like. He's extremely raw. I don't really know what to make of him. He's definitely an athlete's athlete, but Ohio State projects him to safety. He could be a guy that in a couple seasons plays. Paris Campbell's a former 3-star, finished as a 4-star in the composite rankings from St. Vincent St. Mary, the same high school that produced LeBron. They've actually got 2 of those kids in this class. But Campbell's another electric guy that could be a wide receiver, running back. Ohio State has him listed as a wide receiver for now. He's likely probably to redshirt or maybe just play on special teams in the interim. And then 2 other names just to keep an eye on. Kyle Berger, outside linebacker from St. Ignatius up in Cleveland. He had an injury this past season, his senior year, so I think he's going to probably wind up redshirting for certain. And then Dylan Thompson is a defensive end from Illinois, extremely raw, but high upside with him as well. So I think that there's a bunch of names that could you won't see him for a year or 2, maybe 3.
Sure.
But when they get out there, they could be really good ones.
All right, that is Luke Zimmerman, editor, Land Grant Holy Land, obviously the superior Ohio State destination on the interwebs. He and Matt Brown do a fantastic job, and the whole staff at Land Grant Holy Land, so be sure to check out Land Grant Holy Land on the SB Nation Network for all things Ohio State. Luke, have yourself a fantastic day, especially now that the day is essentially over for you as an Ohio State recruiting fan.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you very much. All right, that is Luke. He is fantastic. This feels like a natural time to shift over to Michigan.
It does.
The Michigan recruiting class is a pretty good one. We've seen the focus of Brady Hoke in the past couple of years really turn to anybody that could play tight end or offensive line. Has really been the focus of Michigan classes. This year we're headlined by what appears to be the most talented, purely college-ready cornerback in the country in Jabril Peppers, who's actually fairly local to where we are sitting right now. As far as Michigan goes, who stands out besides Jabril Peppers? And let's do a deep dive on Mr. Peppers himself.
Can we talk about Peppers real quick?
Let's do that.
All right, because this guy is a freak. I mean, I went in Under Armour week.
In a good way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, athletic freak. Of course.
Oh, there goes my phone.
Well,
that happens.
You expecting a call?
Yeah,
if we break some news and Dan's phone
coaches
is
are
on the
still
ground.
recruiting me as we speak.
You have eligibility.
I have all the eligibility in the world. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So Jabril Peppers.
Peppers is a guy who I thought was probably the second or third best corner going into Under Armour week. I really like Marlon Humphrey. And then when you got him on the same field, and sometimes it's a little bit tough to evaluate just how good of the competition the kid's playing. I think Peppers does play good competition, but I didn't know if it was quite as good as maybe what Humphrey sees in Birmingham. Peppers is ridiculously athletic. I mean, this guy is probably the best athlete in the country, in my opinion. Good height, good length, good strength, great speed, awesome quickness.
Right.
Totally shut down Ermon Lane a couple days in a row at the Under Armour practice.
And we're seeing him here, yeah.
They're actually going to hand him the football here, and this is just some ridiculous. Look, I mean,
just the athleticism
this is just
on
silly.
display.
Yeah, he's like, oh, you're not going to tackle me, and you're not either. Here's 5, 6, 7, 8. We need some like whoop. Chris Berman style. I always wanted to do that on camera.
And if there is anything Michigan needs an upgrade with, it's the athleticism.
Indeed.
It's sheer numbers. They start getting guys like Derek Green to up the level of the offensive skill, but defensively, to get a talent like Jabril Peppers is ridiculous.
Exactly. And this guy, I think Michigan has to find a way to use him on offense some too, and certainly in special teams. I know that you made the Charles Woodson comparison, or at least he did when he committed there.
Yeah.
And that's been bandied about a lot. I think that's accurate. He's a guy who can really change the game on special teams. Maybe give him some snaps on offense and could play a true lockdown corner.
Yep.
A really good player. I think overall with the Michigan class, it's a good class.
Right.
But I think a lot of Michigan fans, sort of similar to their LSU fans to the South, are a little bit disappointed because they had a true shot at Deshaun Hand, and
they did.
Alabama ends up stealing Deshaun Hand. Now you can't feel bad because Alabama kind of steals from everybody.
Right.
So Michigan fans, it's okay. You guys can go have a beer with Auburn fans tonight. Thanks for Rashaan Evans. But I do think Michigan has lost a little bit of momentum in recruiting because on the field they've not been great, and I think now most Michigan fans are usually very excited about recruiting, and I think they still are to an extent, but. For Brady Hoke now, it's time to win.
Yes.
You have to show some wins on the resume. You had a really nice first year, maybe a year that kind of put expectations off their mark for a little bit.
Sure.
But they did do a nice job in this class. Obviously, they bring in Brian Moan, who's a big-time run-stopping defensive tackle out of Salt Lake City. Wide body, low center of gravity. I like him. If he gives you anything in the pass rush, that's a plus. They grab Mason Cole, who's a versatile offensive lineman, tackle or guard out of Eastlake, actually Tay Scott's teameate. That was a pretty good Eastlake team. They also have a 5-star receiver for the class of 2015 coming next.
Rich get richer, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was certainly a good class for Michigan. I think Cole is probably not an instant impact guy. Moan may be able to get some snaps for them. Pepper certainly is. They had Drake Harris, who I think could be an instant impact guy in the red zone, a receiver who had a really nice state title game 2 years ago for his team there in Michigan.
Right.
Former basketball player, guy with great athleticism and vertical leap, much like Malachi Dupree, who went to LSU.
Yep.
But I don't know that this class is necessarily. I don't know if the depth of this class is really there. It's not necessarily like Ohio State. I feel like has better depth up and down. Michigan has those names like we saw in our top 5 card there. I don't know that the next 10 guys in their class are great.
Okay, interesting enough. But they do get more athletic. They do get more talented, at least at the top on the defensive side of the ball. And we know Michigan's going to be going through some changes on offense, bringing in Doug Nussmeier from Alabama to take over that offense from Al Borges. So when there is transition, they lose their best receiver in Jeremy Gowan. They lose Fitztoussaint. I like Toussaint. Devin Gardner has an up and down year, finishes pretty strong, but coming off an injury. So anytime you can improve the athleticism on defense, always a good thing, especially with a guy who has had some success with Greg Madison there.
For sure, and I think with Michigan, we talk about this recruiting class. It's about the last recruiting class. How well will the quarterback they just signed, the lefty,
Shane Morris.
Yeah. How well will he fit
in
Doug's offense? Is he going to be able to step in and do well, or is it going to be Devin Gardner?
Right.
I guess we'll have to see what goes on there.
I would imagine it's a wide open competition.
Right, it probably should be.
Yeah.
Neither of them were actually all that great this year, but to me, their top 4 is really, really good. Ferns is also a nice player, but I think there's a pretty good drop-off in this class. So what you're going to have to see is all these 4 and 5 stars that Brady Hoke has recruited over the last 2 years. They need to step up and make some plays, and Hoke and them have to develop these guys because if you're waiting on true freshmen to make plays for you, that's tough. A few of these guys can. Most of these guys can't.
Yeah, and especially along the offensive line, which they've recruited pretty well in terms of what recruiting services have said. But that offensive line last year, whatever they were doing to rotate in guys around Taylor Lewan was not working.
What was the stat against Michigan State? It was negative. It wasn't triple digits, but it was pretty.
It was multiple dozens of negative yards.
Rushing.
Yeah, exactly. Against Michigan State. So now if you are Michigan, not only are you trying to accrue the most value, you're competing against Michigan State, a team within your state who is the clear class of the state right now.
Exactly.
Ohio State, who is clearly out recruiting everybody in the conference.
Dave Anderson's doing a nice job at Wisconsin.
Dave Anderson's doing a very nice job. Yeah.
You have James Franklin out at Penn State.
Greg Anderson, yeah.
Yeah. Excuse me, yes. Okay.
Yes, I think.
Anderson with an E.
Yes.
And then you have James Franklin at Penn State, who's doing a
Gary Anderson.
Gary Anderson.
Excuse me, there it is.
Neither of us can get this right.
This is what happens, Big Ten. Cheese clouds our brains.
And we have Big Ten weather here today.
We do
in New York. It was
by the
snowing.
way, the back you can't really see. It's icy outside, and the fact that Bud and I are here in studio, you're welcome that we're alive. Or
Indeed.
I'm so sorry.
For 90 minutes.
For
twice.
90 minutes, yes, for free.
James Franklin at Penn State is going to be really tough. I know Bill O'Brien did a great job there. Franklin is going to kick their recruiting to another level. I don't know if he's quite as good a coach as O'Brien was, but certainly in terms of on the recruiting trail, that's going to get a lot tougher too. And so for Michigan, Brady Hoke, if you put the wins on the field, Michigan will continue to kind of recruit itself.
Right.
If you don't, then I think you have a real issue next year going into recruiting because you're going to have a lot of people asking about Brady Hoke's job security.
All right, it's fair enough. And then Bo Pelini, he gets the crap he gets, but he's developing players and he's still attracting players to Lincoln.
Yes, exactly. Nebraska did a pretty nice job closing. I know they did not get Blake McLean today, but they did a nice job down the stretch. I remember looking at their class a couple weeks ago. I wasn't really impressed, but they did a nice job closing up some holes there, and that's not an automatic out if you're Michigan.
Right. Oh, by no means is anybody an automatic out, especially after what they were not able to do on the ground last season and, struggling with the teams they struggled, Akron, UConn. So they really need to figure out dominance and need to do it quick because the Big Ten is catching up.
Yep.
I think, now you add Maryland, who, granted, Maryland, not the greatest team in the world, but you look at the receivers that are coming back, and Deion Long and Stephon Diggs. You look at now adding Prince. They're solidifying all over the field, and they're in a recruiting area where they're going to attract people to a major conference. And then Rutgers, I'm not crazy about Rutgers.
We may bring up Rutgers next year, but Maryland, I don't think a lot of people realize this. They lost both their NFL-type receivers to broken legs in the same game. I mean, that's some Randy Edsel luck for you right there. You get those guys back, you get Damian Prince. I think Etzel's actually a pretty good coach, and again, they're going to be a little bit better in the Big Ten, I think, than people believe. Their recruiting has been okay. Loxley does a great job getting that local talent in that area. Their offensive coordinator, Mike Loxley, who was at Florida for a while when
Illinois, but he's always pulled D.C., Maryland, Virginia, that area. He's done very well in.
Exactly.
All right, so we're going to go now. We have Eric Rudder from Maize n Brew. Deeper dive for Michigan and what they were able to do all over this class and how things project moving forward. Eric, can you hear me?
Hey guys, how are you doing?
We're doing outstandingly well. We just finished talking a little bit about Michigan, but as you see it, obviously the big name headlining this class is Jabril Peppers, but who immediately is able to come in physically in terms of polish and compete for positions atop or near the top of depth charts as you see it from this class?
I think obviously Jabril Peppers is going to have the biggest impact from day one. Mm-hmm. He's one of the most complete prospects that I've seen in the last 3 to 5 years, and he can compete with even some NFL defensive backs right now. That's how put together he is physically. And he's really a specimen that can impact the game as soon as he gets on campus this fall.
All right, and in terms of names that are perhaps not ready for 2014, but longer-term projects, guys you're interested to see once they put on weight, take off weight, get time in a system, learning from older players, learning from coaches, who down the line stands out to you as guys that intrigue?
One thing about this class for Michigan is that Brady Hoke has put together perhaps his most college-ready class that he's had during his regime at Michigan. And they've made it a priority to recruit players that are physically complete and that can compete the day they get to campus. A couple names that stand out that really fit that mold that they're looking for are Michael Ferns at the inside linebacker position.
Okay.
Right now, he tops out at about 245, and that's massive for an incoming freshman.
Yes.
And what makes it even more impressive is that his dad has consistently timed him in the 40. He's measured his box jump, his vertical jump, and he is recording outstanding times, faster times in the 40 and higher jumps than he's ever had before.
Yeah, and we just finished speaking about the athleticism and the increasing athleticism on the Michigan defense, but where Michigan seemed to struggle the most last year was moving the ball on the ground, getting consistent play from the offensive line, getting consistent play from the quarterback position. Not necessarily in this class specifically, but in the last couple classes, how good of a job do you feel like they've done addressing what now appears to be a pretty major issue up front and at quarterback?
Michigan has done a good job at addressing the needs that they have. The offensive line obviously underperformed last year, but a lot of that blame is going to go on the former offensive coordinator, Al Borges.
Sure.
What he tried to do is implement two different blocking schemes, and when you have an offensive line that's comprised of mostly underclassmen, it's going to be difficult to get that group of players to buy into it right away, and mistakes are going to be made.
Fair enough.
When you have injuries on the line and you're shuffling through your depth chart to find out which five are actually the best, it makes it even harder to create cohesion and continuity on that offensive line.
All right.
Something that Michigan's...
Continue.
Sorry, what was that?
No, continue. Sorry.
Okay. Something that Michigan's done really well is build depth on the line.
Mm-hmm.
While it may not have shown last year, they're stacked at about 2-3 players deep that can contribute, maybe not their freshman season, but sophomore and junior years, they should be more than prepared to step in if they need to whenever that time may be.
All right, and when you look at this class as a whole, is it a class that's weighted near the top? Do you feel like it's a complete class? How does it compare talent-wise, depth of talent, especially when you look at these past couple years of very good Michigan classes, at least on paper?
I think this is possibly Brady Hoke's most impressive class so far. In the two classes that have preceded the 2014 class, he had kids that signed about 23 kids the year before, and I want to say 27 the year before that.
Okay.
What makes this class so unique is that there are only 16 commits, and it's going to stay that way.
Damn.
In terms of the rankings, every single team that's ranked above Michigan on all four major sites have over 20 commits. So the rankings are determined by they take the top 20 commits of each school, and those are the guys that are graded and factor into their team rankings. Michigan obviously forfeits 4 of those players that could potentially contribute to their ranking.
Yep.
So what's impressive is that they are putting together a class that is higher ranked than many, many schools that had more players to contribute to the rankings. And they have the highest average grade of stars out of, I want to say, any school outside of the SEC, and only about 3 or 4 schools overall outmatch Michigan in that regard.
All right, fair enough. Well, his name is Eric Rutter. Of course, you can find all of his work on Maize n Brew. The whole staff of Maize n Brew does a fantastic job. I really like our Big Ten sites. Big Ten does a fantastic
we have a good
job.
Big Ten group.
Yeah, Eric, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully looking forward to seeing a number of the kids from the class signing today contribute sooner rather than later.
Definitely. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Perfect.
Thanks, Eric.
All right. So there's Michigan, and he does mention they're so good at that top that it really is bringing the total talent level of this class up.
And I think really in taking a small class like this, I think Hope knows that, hey, if he doesn't win this year, he's not going to be long for Michigan.
Right.
So you are saving some spots potentially to load up on a very large class next year. I know they had a running back commit from Damian Harris. They lost that, but a real chance to get that back, a 5-star guy who likes Michigan a lot. That's for the next class. We're dropping 2015 kids here, 12 months away. But in taking that small class, they didn't load up on. They didn't really settle for guys. I don't know that all those guys are really going to make quite the impact that some think they will. But I do think they have a nice overall class. But they don't necessarily have that 25, 28 man classes.
Right, the behemoth. Yeah. All right. And because there is just so much damn talent in the SEC. We're going to go back to the SEC now just because they've done so well. A team that, by all accounts, may have a top 5 class in the country, if not higher. Texas A&M. They've done pretty well. Texas A&M, as you look at this, and this is, of course, good bull hunting. It's their territory. But Speedy Noyle, the name does not lie. Kyle Allen, your #1 quarterback. I think pretty much everybody's #1 quarterback in the country. They address a number of needs on both sides of the ball because it's a program with a lot in flux, losing Johnny Manziel, losing Mike Evans, and then defensively struggling like they did this past season. Texas A&M has recruited the hell out of the state of Texas. Not an accident, not a mistake when Texas has struggled and Furman has gone through the changes that they've gone through. Yep. Texas A&M, you have the fluidity, the continuity, excuse me, with the coaching staff. Texas A&M, where are they strong? Who are the names? And how are they nationally?
You know, I think they're a certainly top 10 class. We just got done talking to our Michigan blogger about how Michigan has an extremely high star average.
Right.
Texas A&M does as well. A really great blend of guys who are just extremely talented, and they filled their needs. I know we have Speedy listed first, and then we obviously have Kyle Allen. Myles Garrett is awesome. Like I did not realize until I got to Under Armour with the practices out there at the All-Star game just how big this guy is. And I know Jeremy Fowler for CBS reported that he was 260 plus pounds when he checked in Texas A&M. This guy is awesome. I think he's probably the best defensive end in the country. Do we want to break here, or do we want to talk about Adoree committed to USC live? Or
Adoree, that is breaking news. Adoree Jackson, the corner who played his high school ball in Southern California, but is from the Midwest, decides to stay in Southern California. I believe he went to Sarah High School, which has been
shocking.
Enormous.
They would send a player to USC.
Shockingly. So that's been a pipeline. Adoree Jackson right now commits on ESPNU to USC. So that's big news.
Yeah, that really is. Adoree, and I know we'll talk more on our 5 o'clock show. That's a plug. If you want to come back for Pac-12 and Big 12 coverage. But Adoree is a guy that can really make a true impact on special teams, at corner, even at receiver some. I know he picked USC over LSU and Florida, also previously considered Tennessee and FSU and some other spots. But a truly special athlete, loves to compete too, and just a really transcendent player in this class, a guy I really like. But we'll get back to talk about Texas A&M.
Texas A&M
I saw it on the screen.
By all means, that's a good break.
They could use him.
I'm sure Texas A&M would love Adoree Jackson as well. So when you look at this class, it's Speedy Noel. You were talking about Myles Garrett and how well he carries that weight.
Instant impact at defensive end.
Right.
A guy who could be #1 overall draft pick in 3 years.
Wow.
I'm serious. Like just that 6'5", 260, the frame to probably play that
so
true.
So a similar size that Clowney came. I don't know for step-wise. I haven't seen anybody that quick right off the line. But in terms of frame and size,
not quite as long as Clowney. Not quite the first step. I would say more power. Better against the run immediately than Clowney was against the run.
Sure.
Clowney is. There's not a Clowney every year. There's probably not a Clowney every decade, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think, Garrett's going to immediately make an impact for them. Speedy Noel is a guy who I was extremely impressed with at Under Armour because he plays quarterback in high school.
Yeah.
And a little bit of running back. They do some stuff like that with some of the zone read stuff, and he does a great job in the New Orleans area. But how do you evaluate a guy's receiver skills?
It's true.
You can look at his athleticism, his agility, his speed, but how do you look at his adjustments to the ball, his ability to get open, his ability to run routes? He's a little bit more raw than some other receivers in this class, but I was extremely impressed at how far along he was when I saw him at Under Armour, given that he plays quarterback. He made several really nice plays on some jump balls, which is impressive for a guy who's probably 5'10", 5'11" off the top of my head, and got open, ran better routes than I expected. I think he's going to catch a lot of balls and make a lot of big plays in the SEC immediately for Texas A&M.
Yeah, and especially now Mike Evans is gone, so there's an open spot. And they've actually recruited Texas A&M, the wide receiver position, really well. Ricky Seals-Jones will be back from his injury.
Exactly.
And the fact that Speedy Noel did play quarterback, it makes it tougher to evaluate, and he is not by far, but he's everybody's #1 receiver and/or athlete.
And we have the highlights here on
Speedy. They do not lie.
Speedy. Yeah, he is extremely good. I'm sure LSU fans not real happy to see him wearing that colors or those colors and him signing with Texas A&M.
A New Orleans product.
But here, let's try and evaluate this guy as a receiver because he's playing some quarterback and playing some running back in his own read scheme. I mean, here we see the breakaway speed. Of course, he's totally smoking all these guys on, and this is not a bad league. Again, this is, New Orleans plays good football.
Yep.
And does the nice little track,
the lean,
the lean to break the tape.
Yep.
Here we go again. Nice agility to the outside, shows that good lateral
and
quickness
the
there. Exactly, the ability to put your foot in the ground, stop, and then change direction, which is very much what you need to do when you run routes. You go hard, you present the same look off the line of scrimmage every time to that defensive back, and then you put your foot in the ground, you change, and you run a different route. There was a throw. He's not going to be throwing a whole lot probably for Texas A&M. Although a cool guy to feature on a trick play perhaps, and a lefty. That's actually cool. Most teams don't expect the guy to throw a ball left-handed. Most trick plays will go to a guy that throws right-handed. A lefty could fool a defense here. That's kind of cool.
Absolutely. And he, especially within that Kevin Sumlin offense, creative ways to get him the ball quickly, not just in space, but somebody that can bounce outside, bounce inside, and yes, will run specialty packages. And it also reminds me, Michael Crabtree, high school quarterback. It's, you don't just immediately say
Deion Sanders, high school quarterback.
Yes.
You still see this sometimes because it's so effective.
And Quan Bolden. This is not an accident. Yeah.
In high school, a lot of times, unless you're on a team that's totally loaded, you want to put the ball in your playmaker's hands. And what player touches the ball on every single play? The quarterback. I guess the center too, but you don't see a whole lot of playmakers at center. But yeah, I think he's going to be really, really good for them. A guy who was further along than I expected him to be. And then if Kyle Allen wins that job, a guy that Allen's really going to appreciate throwing the football to.
All right, and fair enough. It's time to talk to Good Bull Hunting. Good Bull Hunting they do such a fantastic job with all things Texas A&M. You have all sorts of what appears to be made-up names, or they just have terrific luck in finding terrific. I'm saying terrific a lot today. They have good luck finding writers with weird names. We now bring in Orion H. Jarvis. Orion, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Ah, it's a beautiful thing. How are things down in Texas?
It's good. I got to say, I take exception as a center in high school. I take exception to the comment that centers aren't playmakers on the high school level.
Well, the play doesn't start without you.
I understand.
Fair enough. All right, Orion, how do you evaluate when you look at the class in front of you today that appears to be pretty much all set? How do you evaluate the needs that have been addressed, the value of the kids being brought in, and who do you expect to compete immediately for a Texas A&M team that is in a fantastic place right now in college football?
Overall, I think it's definitely arguably one of the best classes that Texas A&M has ever signed. You lose Johnny Manziel and Mike Evans, and you replace them with a Kyle Allen and Speedy Knoll. I mean, you really can't do much better than that. On a defensive front that could get no pressure last year, you bring in arguably the number one player in the country and Myles Garrett out of Arlington Martin, the two best defensive tackles in the state of Texas. You signed both of those guys, and you were able to go get a couple of defensive ends, one Jarrett Johnson from Katy and Quaylen Cunningham from Arizona. So you definitely addressed those needs. The only two positions really that weren't addressed in this class were safety and middle linebacker. The late defection of Dylan Sumner Gardner following Coach Yates to Boise State really hurt. And Kenny Young choosing to go to UCLA today is something that really, the sore thumb, I guess you could say, for this class, two positions that A&M really needed to fill, an inside linebacker and a safety.
Yeah, and Motrell McGrew also commits to Oregon.
And we should also mention Jose Scott, who I think would be very high on that board, on that graphic that we just showed. Ended up not signing with Texas A&M because of academics, and that's a real disappointment because he is clearly one of the best linebackers in the entire country, easily one of the 4 or 5 best.
All right, and Orion, when you look at the sort of depth of this class, perhaps names not immediately going to compete. Obviously, sometimes kids just need to put on weight, take off weight, just sort of gain polish and experience in the system. What are some names you're looking forward to seeing how they developed, whether it's 2015, 16, 17?
I think the offensive linemen from the high school level that A&M brought in, you look at Coda Martin, Zach Ledwick, guys, Tank Johnson, Kelvin Johnson, are guys that are going to need a few years, like most high school seniors do that play on the offensive line, are going to need a couple of years in the strength program and a meal program at the college level. Those guys are guys that you're going to look for 2 years ago that are going to add some quality depth to this squad and compete for starting jobs down the road. That's who's development as a former offensive lineman myself, who I'll really be paying attention to.
All right, I want to ask a question about Kyle Allen, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it. How good is he now to your eyes to immediately come in and compete? Obviously, Texas A&M has quarterbacks on the roster. Kyle Allen, though, the overwhelming, it seems, #1 quarterback in the country, comes from Arizona, not the highest level of competition, but quickly growing. We see, Brett Hundley succeeding at UCLA coming out of that area. Kyle Allen, how ready is he to immediately make an impact, if at all, for Texas A&M?
Completely ready. And what makes Kyle Allen so great is his footwork and his mechanics from the high school level. And it makes him, he is deadly accurate. And just like Case Keenum, that's exactly what Kevin Sumlin and Jake Spavital are looking for in this offense. He is a legitimate option to be the starting quarterback for Texas A&M next year. It's going to be very interesting to watch he and sophomore Kenny Hill push each other and see who eventually comes out on top. But to answer your question, Kyle Allen is by far the best quarterback A&M's ever recruited. Even Johnny Manziel he was a 4-star on some boards, but not all. But yeah, he's in a league of his own, and he definitely has the tools and exactly what Coach Sumlin and Spavital are looking for.
And to add to that, I actually ran into Kyle Allen's personal quarterback coach, Dennis Guile, who's based out of Arizona. He does a lot of the stuff with the Elite 11, and I was updating our scouting reports the other week, and I called Dennis, and I said, Dennis, what is Kyle Allen's weakness?
Right.
And he said, I'm not trying to sound like a homer here, but really he doesn't really have one from a high school perspective.
Right.
I mean, the only question is how quickly will he be able to pick up the offense and manage a team as the quarterback in college, because mechanically he's the best I've ever had. He throws a great ball. He has plenty of arm strength, good build. Kid who leads his high school team well. He said it just wouldn't be fair for me to really say this kid has a weakness, because in high school he's one of the best they've seen.
And to add to your addition, Kevin Sumlin has done a fantastic job crafting offensive systems to his personnel. So maybe it's not overly complex with Kyle Allen. Maybe it, tailored towards getting the ball as quickly out of his hands as possible to the talent they've amassed around Kyle Allen. That makes sense to me. Orion Jarvis, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of what sounds like a car ride, and enjoy this class, and be hopeful, as we all are, that the defensive recruits come in and make a quicker impact than a delayed one.
For my sanity, they're going to have to. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Fair enough. Thank you again. Texas A&M doing a fantastic job. Kevin Sumlin, and appears to be doing a great job even looking beyond the class of 2014.
Everything just seems to have gone right for them in the last couple of years.
Yes.
They get to move to the SEC. Some of the teams in the SEC West were a little bit down when they came in there. Clearly, Auburn was not a power 2 years ago when they went on that great run.
Right.
When Johnny Football won the Heisman. Mac Brown, towards the end of his run there at Texas, did not recruit very well. I think that they will face stiffer competition on the recruiting trail when Charlie Strong gets that thing up and running. But right now, A&M is recruiting Texas better than it's ever done. Yeah,
no, it's ridiculous, and they are doing a fantastic job. We're going to shift our attention now to the SEC East. Florida, a team that, the highs and lows of Florida, I can't imagine there's been a team in the past 10 years, and they really have done a good job, as they should do every single year, at least at the top. It's another top-heavy class, not unlike what Michigan's done, but at the top, they're very impressive, and notably enough, they're getting kids from all over the Eastern Seaboard. Yep. And that's what they have done. They've recruited the Northeast very well. But you look at the top kids, the top 4 kids, at least on this list, according to the 24/7 composite, not from the state of Florida.
No, they did a better job outside of Florida this year for the most part. We should note Florida was on pace to have a great South Florida class.
Yes.
But that was before they went 4-8. Obviously, running the Florida State side, I have a lot of people ask me, why would this kid go to Florida? And I said, look, Florida to them is not a 4-8 program. They were a 4-8 team, but Florida's won 2 national titles since these kids were in first grade.
Yeah, how many programs can raise their hand saying they won 2 national titles in the past 8 years?
I think 3. Yeah. Them, LSU, and Bama.
Right.
I think, and then the other 5 have been singles. So that still resonates with kids. Certainly, Florida's facilities didn't go away from being 4-8.
Right.
They still have a coaching staff that, while fans may not like some fans may not like, the players for Florida really like them. So when they go on official visits, kids are told really good things. I know they flipped Trayon Harris today from Florida State. Florida is moving to a spread offense, so they really tried to get some kids this year today that will fit into their spread offense, and some kids that will make an early impact. And look at the list here. We had the list up on the board, but expanded list. They have 9 early enrollees. Yeah, this is kind of a make or break year for Will Muschamp.
Oh, absolutely.
And so if these kids are going to compete early and make an impact, getting them in early really is a big difference. And having about a third of your class get in early is a pretty big deal. I like Brandon Powell a lot. He's a kid who's not on our board, but I think he's a potential impact guy as a running back slot type in that new spread offense. Yep. Will Greer was one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Jalen Tabor is a corner who I think is going to fit perfectly into what Will Muschamp.
Committed to Arizona for about an hour and a half.
Yes, exactly. A kid who Maryland really wanted as well, out of that D.C. area. And they did a nice job. Duke Dawson is a kid who I think competes very well. They grabbed Gerald Willis, another player out of New Orleans that LSU thought they were going to get, and they ended up not. Gerald Willis, also whose mom is also the mom of Landon Collins, and who notably had kind of the meltdown on TV 2 years ago when Collins chose to go play in Tuscaloosa and not in New Orleans. And then they grabbed Thomas Howley, a kid who was a Penn State commit. Penn State loses Coach Larry Johnson to Ohio State, and they pick up a 5-star defensive tackle out of Brooklyn. So it's a nice class for Florida. It could have been better, but by adding some of the guys they missed on. I know they were really hoping to have Adoree Jackson. I thought they were really very much in on Adoree Jackson, and had one of the best shots to sign him along with LSU. But it's a nice class. Is it exactly what they needed? I'm not sure, but I think it does fill a lot of their needs.
Will Greer, as a quarterback, you mentioned him being one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Anybody he compares to immediately how's his size. Because honestly, the quarterback position, Tyler Murphy decides to transfer. There's not a ton of depth there. They have Spencer Morningweg. They bring in, who did they bring in last year?
Oh, gosh. The kid who Oh, shoot, I forget.
In any case, the quarterback position is certainly, there's no luck on that job.
Right.
Who do you compare Will Grier to? How ready is he for the college game?
You know, stylistically, his throwing motion reminds me a little bit of kind of like a cleaner Phillip Rivers. Now,
okay.
now some people make fun of Phillip Rivers' throwing motion, and I'm not trying to knock Will Grier. In fact, I like his motion.
Right.
I think he throws a really good ball. He's accurate. He has good ball placement. If you watch his film, certainly not the best competition there in the Charlotte Catholic League, but his guys are able to catch the football and make plays after the catch. And certainly, he needs to add some size. He's a smaller guy. If he's 200 pounds right now, I'd be shocked.
Okay.
But I think he could eventually be a bigger guy, and certainly someone who Florida's very happy to sign. Jeff Driscoll is probably still going to hold on to that job, I'd have to imagine. But Grier getting it early, I think at least gives him somewhat of a shot to get in there and compete for it.
Fair enough, and very few people know as much about the Florida Gators. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing after 2013, but we now bring in Andy Hutchins from Alligator Army. I can't imagine there's a better site covering Florida football or even SB Nation in terms of the celebrity hot tub in Spencer Hall, the trinity of them and Alligator Army, whatever it is. Andy Hutchins, how are you? Can you hear me?
I am good. I would have been better if 10 minutes ago Dory Jackson had put on that blue and orange cleat, but
yeah,
didn't happen.
That does happen. So when you look at this year's class, of course now minus Adoree Jackson, what names stand out to you as guys with the Florida team going through some transition, both in terms of personnel and coaching-wise, that should be able to immediately make an impact and or shoot atop or near the top of the Florida depth chart in multiple places?
I think the people you're going to look at when you're looking from fan perspectives is you've got to look at Will Grier. He's the guy who makes all the records happen. He's the guy who throws the ball like Florida fans want quarterbacks to throw the ball, but he's not going to be the quarterback this fall. Jalen Tabor, on the other hand, early enrollee, really talented cornerback, comes into a situation where you have Marcus Roberson and Lucas Purifoy both leaving for the NFL.
Yep.
Jalen Watkins also departing from that secondary. Obviously, he's got some talent. There's lots of playing time available. If he comes in, he's an early enrollee. Obviously, he'll get spring practice. Maybe he takes that job opposite Vernon Hargraves. It could happen.
All right, fair enough. And when you look at the prospects that Florida has maybe deeper beneath these top five guys that, for whatever reason, probably aren't ready, and many are not to immediately come in and compete in the SEC, what names stand out to you as projects, guys that intrigue you, perhaps not for this year, but for down the line?
I think a really interesting project guy is Taven Bryant, who is a recruit out of Wyoming, and Wyoming never produces top recruits. This is, I think, the first guy that Wyoming's had signed anyone since the 90s. But he's really, really good on tape. He's big. He's physical. He's the kind of guy who you could maybe see turning into a J.J. Watt type of defensive end a long time down the line, maybe 2 or 3 years. But Florida got on him before anybody else really did, and secured his commitment, and now he's here and working out and all that good stuff.
All right, and when you look at the past couple of classes this year, last year, perhaps the year before that, how do you evaluate the job that Will Muschamp has done in attracting the right fits for what they used to do and are now trying to do on both sides of the ball for Florida?
I think you can't fault him at all for the defensive recruiting because he goes out and gets 5 stars and elite talent at really just every position. The problem you might have this year is there's no linebacker, but Florida pulled in 4 linebackers, all of whom looked to be really good last year, so there's no real depth issue there. But on offense, you just wonder about the skill position talent a little bit. Last year you pulled in DeMarcus Robinson and Amal Fullwood, who both looked pretty good in flashes in 2013, but beyond them, there's not a whole lot of surety at wide receiver. And then at running back, you've got Kelvin Taylor, who people think is pretty good, but you missed on Dalvin Cook, who flipped to Florida State, so you missed on your home run hitter. And then beyond Kelvin Taylor, you've got Matt Jones, who's coming off injury and who no one knows what he's actually going to be in the fall. And it's a question mark at a lot of different positions on offense right now.
Who do you expect to be starting at receiver, a position that is still sort of, completely shrouded in mystery?
Quinn Dunbar obviously is the incumbent at one position, the wide receiver core, but Fullwood could be the guy on the other side. Robinson could be the guy on the other side. They've obviously both got talent. I think you need to look at both Ryan Sousa and C.J. Wharton, who just committed today. 2 guys who could come in and maybe be the slot guy in this new Kurt Roper offense. And they've definitely got some skills, and they've been really productive in Florida leagues that are pretty competitive, so that's an interesting perspective. But, Florida's got to develop talent that's got on hand. So maybe that means turning Andre DeBose, who we were talking about 6 years ago now, into something that you could actually look at and say, okay, that's a football player, not just a guy who runs straight lines really, really fast.
All right,
So
fair enough.
That's really Florida's problem.
Okay, do you expect this team to be put together in an efficient enough way to run the new offensive scheme that they are looking to do and be more wide open? Bud just talked about them making an effort to really change things up because it is an enormous make or break year for Will Muschamp. Is the personnel there to run that type of offense?
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you simplify things for Jeff Driscoll, which is going to be one of the watchwords this fall and this spring in Florida, if you make the reads easier for Jeff Driscoll and maybe make his legs the primary part of what you do on offense, which you can do now that you've got Will Greer and Treon Harris coming in to be better backups than Florida had in 2013, maybe you make a sort of hybrid spread run Auburn-type offense a really interesting thing under Roper. And Roper, we know, can do a lot of different things with different levels of talent. Obviously, he was not working with great talent at Duke, despite what Dalvin Cook thinks. So, there's a lot of hope that the flexibility that Roper's going to be able to bring in is going to be a good thing for Florida. And I think that there's talent, as long as it gets developed, for Florida to rebound really well from that 2013 season that just didn't go the way anyone expected.
Perfect. Well, Andy, unless you have anything to add.
Andy, I do want to ask you a little bit about J.C. Jackson, obviously a very talented two-way type player who sees himself as a defensive back. I know Florida recruited him as a defensive back. Given how loaded they are on defense and the need for playmakers on offense, how much do you think they may want to try him on offense?
I mean, I think he's the sort of guy that you throw out on defense first because that's where he wants to be first. And then maybe you figure out where you move him eventually. We've seen both Florida and Florida State do this. Valdez Showers started at safety for Florida. He's now a running back. Carlos Williams started at safety for Florida State. He's now a running back. J.C. Jackson's a little bit more like a wide receiver. Obviously, he's done a lot of really good things as a wide receiver in prep play. But I think you throw them out as defensive backs first, see if they take, and then if they don't, figure out a way to make them playmakers on offense.
I think that's totally fair.
All right, fair enough. Andy Hutchins, of course, from Alligator Army on the SB Nation Network. By all means, go to Alligator Army. Enjoy all the coverage that they do. They do a fantastic job. SB Nation is essentially the network of Florida Gator fans trying to come to grips with all things Florida. But Andy, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your signing day, even without Adoree Jackson.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right, so there's Florida. We've touched on the SEC. We've touched on the ACC. Any other teams now that we've covered the sort of headliners within the SEC that stand out to you, that have done better than, worse than expected, big names that you expect to make early impacts or impacts at some point?
Sure. We talked about Ole Miss last year. They were kind of the headliner of signing day last year. This year, not quite as many superstars, but they're bringing together a nice class. But I think the real storylines are probably in the East.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about the West a little more. Auburn's done a really nice job, but they just almost won a national title. I think we'd expect that.
Yep.
Tennessee is bringing in, I believe, 35 players, which is huge, and that's not really oversigning. And they just when you go through that many head coaches in that many years and that many different scheme changes,
there's turnover.
Exactly. You have a lot of attrition, and they're bringing in guys who can make an immediate impact for them. A really nice, important class, a lot of early enrollees. I think they had like 14 guys enroll early. They'll be taking part in spring practice. I think you'll see a lot of those names come fall.
Yep.
Mark Stoops of Kentucky has done a really nice job as well. I mean, Kentucky forever has not recruited at all. I mean, they obviously brought in some players. They field a team, but nothing really special. Mark Stoops has done a great job of recruiting Ohio specifically. Yes. The Stoops name is really big in Youngstown, and he's able to go into Ohio and tell some kids, hey, if you're not going to get that Ohio State offer, why not come play in the SEC for me?
Fair enough.
That pitch is working quite a bit, and I think that's a smart pitch too, because if you grow up in Ohio, you want to go to Ohio State, but Ohio State can only take so many kids. Kentucky has open spots as well.
Yep.
Get a chance to show yourself against Georgia, against Florida, against that improving Tennessee program. And then, as I mentioned, Georgia, they're bringing in a really, really talented class. 2 5-star type running backs in Sony Michel and Nick Chubb. Sony Michel, all-name team.
Yep, absolutely.
And a little bit later here, I think around 3:30, we will see the Lorenzo Carter announcement, a 5-star defensive end. Certainly would be a big piece to add to the Georgia class if that comes true. And I think Georgia is probably where he'll end up.
Yep. Any other classes that perhaps not stocked with 4 and 5 stars? Mizzou coming off a good year. Were they able to take advantage of how well and they looked on the field and the attention that they got?
It looks like Mizzou has held on to Raquel Williams, a talented defensive end who I know a lot of programs were coming after and looking at. And that's the thing. Mizzou has done a great job of scouting. They were not really all that high up in the recruiting rankings, but yet they made it to the SEC title game. And so I think programs down the stretch realize, wow, Mizzou really evaluates very well. And there's some kids that are obvious evaluations, and then there's some kids that kind of make or break your class sometimes that are kind of the true tiebreakers. And they're guys you have to evaluate. Mizzou does a really nice job of that. People came after their commits, and for the most part, they were able to hold them together.
Ole Miss, of course, the story of 2013 and the class thereof. How do they follow up their big year? Is there anybody that can come in right away? Any names you like that Ole Miss is bringing in?
You know, I do like this one kid, Breland Speaks.
Okay.
Who is a kid I saw in a camp over the summer. I thought he was a little bit of a bad body kid, but he's continued to really improve. A defensive lineman. Of course, Ole Miss, we think defensive lineman. They brought in some talented JUCOs. They have Kimdiche. They have what's his name that they signed away from Auburn last year. But I like Breland Speaks.
Right.
He's a nice player for them. I think they picked up Decorius Law, who will be a nice addition on the offensive side. And that's going to be an interesting team to watch. Hugh Freeze followed up his first campaign with, I believe, the same record in his second year.
Yeah.
And if you want to take Ole Miss to the next level, you can either A, have one of the guys in your team have a brother who's just a crazy talent.
That's not bad.
Or B, win a few more games, which is perhaps even tougher. It may be easier to have another kid have a Kimdiche-like brother than it is to win more ball games in the SEC West. But that's going to be that challenge for that program. You have your one great class. You follow it up with a class that didn't drop off a ton. I mean, it's still a top 20 type class, but can you put some more wins on the field so that kids come because of what you're producing as opposed to what you're selling?
Right. Fair enough. One other school that we should touch on, because they're not a Big 12 team, they're not a Pac-12 team, so we will not be talking about them during the later broadcast, but certainly impactful in the recruiting landscape. Notre Dame, the Fighting Irish, offensive line heavy. They address a number of their needs. Brian Kelly has done a very good job in recent years bringing in guys on both sides of the ball. They do turn over some of the talent on both sides, though. How well did they do? Who do you like from this Notre Dame team or this Notre Dame class to immediately come in and compete? You
know, I really like Justin Brent a lot. He's another kid I saw in Columbus, one of the kids that actually beat Damon Webb on some reps. I know we mentioned Damon Webb earlier at the corner when we were talking about Ohio State. Brent is not the fastest kid, but he's very quick twitch in and out of his routes. And to me, a lot of times, quickness is a little bit more important than top-end speed because unless you're running a go route, at some point you're going to have to break down and stop and change direction. Brent does that very well. Extremely strong. I think he'd be a very difficult player to press and catches the ball naturally and has very strong hands. On his highlight tape, he makes a lot of one-handed catches, which shows, A, he has big hands because he can grasp the ball. B, he has strong hands because he can really clutch that thing. I think Brent can make an instant impact for them for sure. We know that Notre Dame runs a lot of spread sets, so they have multiple positions to use receivers at, and I like Justin Brent a lot. Niles Morgan, obviously a really active linebacker, a kid that Ole Miss was certainly looking to sign. Notre Dame beats them out for that. Illinois is an important territory.
Yeah, there's talent
for Notre Dame. And last year, if you remember, Ole Miss goes into Illinois, and who do they sign? Laquan Treadwell. Yeah. If you're Notre Dame, that can't become a normal thing. You cannot lose Illinois kids to Ole Miss. You're not going to win.
I like that Notre Dame has to put up a fence around a state that they're not themselves in.
Right, exactly. Well, in Indiana doesn't really produce that much talent. Occasionally you'll get a really good player, but other than that, there's not much. And I like Andrew Trumbetti. Not a huge kid, but a great motor, and I think extremely quick off the football. His first step is one of the best I saw this year. Gives offensive tackles a lot of problems with that first step, and is able to play low with a lot of leverage. And it's hard to get a good leverage on a guy when he's constantly going underneath your hands.
Is he prepared to play pretty quickly? Because this is a Notre Dame team that loses a ton along their front.
I think as a pass rush guy, maybe. I don't know if he's big enough to play in their 3-4 defense as a defensive end. Maybe he could play some of that stand-up outside linebacker role. We'll have to see, but he's not 290, and they want big guys for all three of their down positions. Exactly.
Okay, fair enough. So Notre Dame doing a good job recruiting areas that have been fertile for them. Illinois, the Northeast. We've seen Brian Kelly in previous years maybe go a little bit harder after the state of Florida. Obviously, Charlie Weiss went hard after California and some of the areas in the Southwest. So it's good to see Brian Kelly sort of sticking with bread and butter where Notre Dame is still that huge name.
And Notre Dame is still working on a couple kids. They're obviously still somewhat in it for John Juju Smith, the 5-star athlete out of California, who we'll see announced later today. And then they're also in it for, and I'm going to botch his name, but I think it's Micah Quick.
Yeah, it's
the receiver out of Fresno.
Micah Quick,
Micah, it's his last name is Quick. He is pretty quick. He's a receiver, and he's looking at Oklahoma and Notre Dame and one other team that I'm blanking on right now. It's a live show.
But two schools that have done actually a really good job in the area.
Yes, exactly.
Fresno,
Oklahoma's done a great job in the San Diego area. I'm sure we'll talk about that some in our 5 o'clock show when we break down the Big 12 and Pac-12. But yeah, I think Oklahoma has a nice class here, and they're really establishing something at Notre Dame. They're consistently bringing in top 10 talent at the level at which you need to win big time, and I think they're bringing in athletes on both sides of the football. If there's one area that I think that I'd be a little bit disappointed, I don't know if they signed a great deal of defensive line elite talent and like interior linebacker talent, but they've really upgraded the secondary a lot.
Yes.
And that's been big because in previous years, Notre Dame had to play a ton of soft, conservative coverage because they didn't have the guys that could man you up on the outside.
Yeah, and especially now as they make their transition to the ACC and are stocking their depth charts for that, where there are more athletes traditionally than the teams they've played in the Big Ten a lot of these years, it seems all the more important. So fair enough. Let's scroll through the early impact guys for the conferences one more time, if we can. Bud, put on that hat because Bud without a hat. This is the early impact hat. I don't know. I was trying to figure something out. But SEC,
really
DJ Petway, we talked about Jalen Tabor.
He's back.
He is back. Myles Garrett, Josh Malone, Leonard Fournette. They're all sorts of. Josh Malone, a receiver out of Tennessee, part of that enormous class.
Yeah, for me, really, the top 2 receivers in the country are Malone and Dupree, or Dupree Malone. Malone, a little bit better top gear than Dupree. Dupree is the little bit better.
I love that you're talking seriously with this ridiculous hat. Yeah, it's fantastic. It makes no sense. Yeah,
exactly. And I think all those guys can certainly make an early impact because they have the talent, but there's also the need there at those schools, at those positions. And so that's why we picked that group. We know Bama needs some help on the edge. Florida, certainly at corner with Jalen Tabor. They lose a lot as we talk Andy Hutchins. Myles Garrett is a total athletic freak. Malone. Tennessee loses a lot all over their roster. I think they lose like 14 or 15 starters. It's a big-time talent departure there in Tennessee. And then Fournette is a transcendent running back talent. So that's a really good group for the SEC. And with the SEC, and I know we talked a lot of SEC ball today, we could have put like top 25 instant impact guys. I mean, they have so many. If you took it, and I said, Dan, you could have the SEC's combined recruiting or the best combined recruiting classes from the rest of the conferences in the country.
It's tough.
You might take the SEC.
You just might.
I mean, there's going to be more talent to come out of all the other ones combined because of certain, just odds and numbers and whatnot. But if you had to like take player for player, it's tough. They're nuts.
It's pretty much impossible. The ACC, obviously, terrain you're very familiar with. Andrew Brown, Mike London not doing a fantastic job with Virginia on the field, but like keeping top kids close by.
If Mike London had been fired, there were so many teams that wanted to swoop in and get Andrew Brown. The best defensive tackle in the country, a young player too. A lot of times these big guys in the interior who are really good, we find out they're actually like a year or two older than grade level. Andrew Brown is not. He's actually just on grade level or a little bit below. Great length, great quickness. I think he has the frame to eventually play at like 300, 310 pounds. And that's a future NFL type player.
Absolutely.
Chad Thomas, immediate help for Miami. We already talked about it a little bit. The defensive end position. Casey McDermott, the same. Good legacy. Obviously, he had 2 brothers who played offensive guard, offensive tackle previously. Travis Rudolph, one of the early impact guys for Florida State at receiver because they lose Kelvin Benjamin and Kenny Shaw. And then Artavis Scott, another early impact guy for Clemson.
And as we finish this out with the Big Ten, it just gives me an excuse to say, Raekwon! And I like saying that. Jabril Pepper is probably the headliner, though, just because he's so above and beyond everybody at corner.
Can truly change the game, especially at corner and then on special teams as well. Raekwon, we talked about.
Not going to Stanford, going to Ohio State.
But a big-time player on the inside linebacker. Jeff Jones, one of the more underrated linebackers I saw in this class. I don't know if we've confirmed that he's actually signed with Minnesota yet, but I know he's a Minnesota commit entering today. Florida came after him. Michigan came after him. I know Iowa State kind of not really fitting that mold. Also came after him, but I think he was intent on sticking with Michigan or with Minnesota. And a guy, I really like his balance. He runs a little bit upright, but somehow he's able to stay that way, and that's really impressive to me. Drake Harris is another really impressive guy. That's a good group in the Big Ten. I like that group.
I like all of the groups. I like all of the names. The optimism is abound right now because it is signing day, and everybody looks like they're going to be awesome. And that's the fun of signing day. That's the fun of college football. We get to see how it all shakes out.